Hi guys, continuing with our presentation of the new version of RadCORE.
Bom,
Let's talk now about dynamic validation.
é,
For those who have an idea, web templates, native HTML templates, you may have already seen that validation process in the forms where the edit turns red, a message appears below, something similar to that. Well, RadCORE brings a validation system without using HTML. As you already heard me say at the beginning of the project, I try to create all the features of RadCORE, showing all the power that UniGUI offers and that RadCORE offers without having to use HTML. That is, everything natively.
tá? Então,
So Validate gained a new feature now in version 6.0, which is the validation of components within just a container.
tá?
So let's first take a look at how validation works, and then at this new validation feature in containers.
Ok?
Let's open up the RadCORE here.
Tá?
I left it in our last video. We have the version using the Indigo theme, and I decided to create the Brazil version. I changed its port, which is 8076,
6,
and I kept our global version at 8075.
5,
And I left it with the same Indigo theme, but using the light theme. So you can see the difference, the details between each of the color themes that RadCORE will offer you.
tá bom?
So the light theme, the menu turns white, so we'll see these little details in a bit. So let's open Megadam. I'll come to other examples and let's talk about components for forms.
Tá? Então, o que é que nós vamos estar aqui?
Let's open the same Brazil model, different examples for forms.
Tá? Ó. Então,
Here we have two open models with different systems.
bom,
Well, let's go. Here in the inline form example, I have validation testing.
tá?
So just to give an example of how it works, I'm going to click on the Save button here. And you'll notice that a validation message only comes from the first one, the message with show message. But if there are several fields to be validated, you'll see them all with their respective messages.
Tá? Ó.
Let's see it here in English too, so we can analyze it.
Tá? Ó. Então, o
RC Translate works here. In the global version, you will see here the messages in English. Okay, and everything is working perfectly fine. So how does the validation process work? We know that in every form we need to code, right, to be able to validate something. So the famous ifs, right? So you will validate something, such as entering at least 4 characters. So you would have to do if to test whether the tau field, its length is 4 characters long or not. This is the normal, conventional process of development. Now imagine you have 10 forms, and in each of these 10 forms, you have to validate that same field. The worst thing is that the conventional scenario is that there won't just be a validation field.
tá? Então,
So you imagine that out of these 10 forms, you have several fields to validate. So you can imagine the amount of code you will normally be doing to validate each of the forms to have all this control.
tá?
So within RadCORE, what will we have? What do you receive? What benefits do you have within RadCORE? So I'm going to open our demo forms here, and we'll see how the validation works. So I have my ID field here. I'm going to open arc limits, and the only thing you have here in our arc limits, the only passing word related to the validation question. I have 3 attributes, but we are now talking about validation. So this guy here is responsible for doing the entire validation process. If we open our events here, there is no code, it's on the edit button. And if I observe the event of my save button, the only thing I will have there is the call to our form validate function.
Tá certo?
So I'm passing this function to it as a parameter that is precisely my entire current formula. In other words, it will validate everything inside my form, and which obviously has the valid attribute.
Tal.
So if I ask you to see the parameters here in valid, you will see the number of options that valid offers. See the number of things you can use with valid and the number of codes you can reduce from your application.
Tá?
So there are several ways you can validate through RadCORE. So here I am using the min parameter of valid, where I pass attribute to it. Valid min 4. In other words, this field to pass, to be validated, I have to type at least 4 characters.
Tá?
So as you can see, I don't have anything beyond that. And when you click, when you say save, you see that a predefined message appears, but with all the context, including the count of characters that were typed.
Tá?
So if I come here and type 2 items here, tell it to save again, it will count the character. All of this, folks, is already internally in the hardcode code in the form validate function, everything controlled by it. So imagine now the scenario of how much code will be reduced in your application. An application that you have in 50, 100, 200 forms. Applications that we have for users that have more than 300 forms. Can you imagine the amount of code you really need? You will be able to reduce it just with the validation process part, of which there are many. Okay, guys? It's a lot. We'll see another example in a moment. Okay, but what do I want to talk about now? We have here on the issue of our new version, I mentioned about container validation.
Tá?
So how does this work here in RadCORE?
Tá?
So we will have this block here validated, but as I showed you, I'm passing the parameter here to my function, just the self parameter. That is, I will validate everything.
Tá?
When you want, for example, I want to validate only what is here inside this container here, right? In this case, which is RC block 46, you will simply pass it from here to it. So I'm just going to do the comment test. You will pass then the form and will pass which container you want to use for validation. With that being RadCORE, I'll comment again, just so as not to take away from the originality of the demo. So if I had other validations here in other fields, they wouldn't be criticized the moment I click the save button, just the ones here. So you can concentrate validation by blocks, okay? I can concentrate my validation by tabs, for example, within page control. So it leaves your imagination to use man validation. To give us an even broader view of the process, we will demonstrate validation in our customer form.
Tá? Então,
You will analyze here, for example, I have the number of licenses here.
tal.
I have a validation here where I can pass a mathematical expression. It will be valid if what I enter here is greater than 1 and less than 9.
Tá certo?
So this is another example. So there are several examples of validation that you will be able to use by seeing here, for example, the demo, the RadCORE mega demo.
Tal.
So I have here several forms, several ways that you can use validation. So let's now see a more detailed, broader example of validation. I'm going to open my customer record here.
Tal.
Let's do the same thing here at global.
customers. Tal.
I'm going to edit here. I'm going to go here to my licenses tab. Let's go to Brazil, licenses.
Tá?
Well, here, folks, there are several other validation controls.
Tá?
What did I want to demonstrate to you? That's it from here. So as we saw here in the code, let me open the code here. What did we have here for validation, for example, for the number of licenses?
Tal. Então,
I need to enter a number between 1 and 9.
ok? Então,
What are we going to do here? I'm going to take it here and put 12.
tá certo?
And I'll try to record.
Tal. Então,
Informed content. Now see what our validation message looks like.
tá? Então,
She automatically received marquee.
tá?
Why that? Well, RadCORE will automatically detect if the size of your edit field is smaller than the size of the message content. Automatically the validation message will be marked, so as not to be broken and much less not to cause error.
Tá?
I don't know if you've noticed, but normally a validation message on a website with standard Bootstrap, for example, it breaks the message, it breaks and ends up moving whatever div is down. And I don't really like that visual result. So in terms of visual results, RadCORE tries to do everything in the best way possible. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I really try to offer what is most pleasing to the eye with the example of use.
Claro, certo? Bom, então, ó, temos.
We have another example of how dynamic validation works.
Tal. Então, vamos cancelar
Let's cancel here, let's close everything, and let's continue.
de tal. Só
Just to make an example here for the global, the same message as in this case here fits perfectly.
exatamente, tal.
The resolution here fits perfectly in our field.
Tal. A gente
In our example here, I have my browser reduced, which is why it went into marquee. Here my browser is expanded.
tá certo?
So if I decide here, reduce my browser here, I'll do the same thing we did in the other one. Licenses, I'll put 11 here. Automatically, the marquee will also enter. Okay?
Porque a gente estava com
Here the browser is expanded, and here the browser was shrunk.
tá?
So I'm going to leave it as it was, again, so that everything is standardized. Well, let's move on with our explanations.
Dentro
Within this same validation context, we also have a dynamic attribute in RadCORE called valid required.
tá? Bom,
You've probably already seen the asterisk above the field in many template models. So this, folks, is the presence of value required.
tá? Então,
So RadCORE used to use a model in which I could place the asterisk inside my addition field, and I could position it inside the field, right here, outside the field, at the bottom. You could do this positioning within the valid requirement.
tal. Então, deixa
So let me just open the other model here. I'll even open the other form model here, where I also have the valid required at the bottom.
tá certo?
So how does this work? I'm going to go here to the General tab. I'm going to open my name field here, and then you'll have the valid required top in here.
Tal.
So this is the attribute responsible for rendering the red asterisk in order to signal to the user that that field is a mandatory field.
Todo, né? Tá certo? Bom,
What's new in RadCORE 6?
tal.
In RadCORE 6, we will now be able to link not only to the edit, but also to the edit field label. So now all I need to do is pass the name of the label, but I want to do this as an attribute of value required. It's true. I'm going to take it here, and start a new record, and then you will see our asterisk linked to the label and not to the edit,
Tá certo?
in accordance with what we observed in the previous example, talking about validation.
Tal.
I put here that it has validation, and the valid requirement is associated with the lab name.
Nome.
Okay? Well, guys, so we're here to close this part about validation, and we'll continue in the next video. Hug.